coffee, big cup, and hello. Welcome to season 2 of the Gilmore Way Podcast. We are gathered here today to talk about holy matrimony on Gilmore Girls. We talked about proposals a few weeks ago, and eventually we'll also be talking about all the weddings in more detail. But this week, we're focusing on the ways the institution of marriage is portrayed on the show by the characters and the writers.
Indeed. If anyone here should know of any reason why they need to avoid spoilers, leave now or forever hold your peace. Before we start, please remember to hit those like and subscribe buttons below. It's fast, it's free, it takes a second to do, and we'd be forever grateful. I now pronounce us ready to begin with our episode summaries.
All right, season 2, episode 1 is Sadie Sadie. Lorelai still has not decided whether she will accept Max's marriage proposal. Advice comes from an unlikely source, Luke, who prompts her to finally start considering the big questions she needs answered before she can say yes. She calls Max from Friday night dinner and peppers him with questions, and he takes her consideration of these things to mean that she wants to say yes, which she ultimately does. Meanwhile, Rory and Dean are happily back together, and Rory is encouraging of Lorelai and Max. As a reward for finishing third in her class at Chilton, top 3% in her class at Chilton, Richard and Emily throw a special dinner for her and say she can bring a friend. She brings Dean, who is then grilled by Richard about his grades and plans for the future, and for not being good enough for Rory. Suki calls Emily about planning a surprise wedding shower for Lorelai, but Lorelai hadn't told her about the engagement yet, and this prompts Emily to tell Richard that he must apologize to Rory immediately because when she gets engaged, she wants her to tell them about it.
This is followed up by episode 2, Hammers and Veils. At summer school, Rory is prompted by Madeline to volunteer for Rebuilding Together, a charity that builds houses because it will look good on her college applications. But this angers Paris, who is still mad at Rory about Tristan. A conversation with Paris while building a house freaks Rory out because she realizes that Paris is years ahead of her when it comes to building her resume for Harvard. And she eventually, after that, goes into project mode that evening because she's looking for more options for volunteer experience. This upsets Dean because she canceled plans for them that they had together for them to do this. Lorelai starts to plan her wedding to Max, but she dreads telling Emily. And when she finally does tell her, Emily is cold about it. While out on a date with Max, Lorelai is worked up into a froth by Max's parents' sweet gesture, which causes her to confront Emily about why she doesn't care about the engagement. And Emily lets slip that she already knew and was hurt that Lorelai told everyone before she told her. At Lorelai's wedding shower, Rory and Dean reconcile after their fight, and Dean tells her that he's glad she's going to Harvard and understands that she has to do what it takes to get in.
Yeah, so obviously these episodes have a lot of wedding talk, and so I thought it would be perfect for a discussion about marriage because marriage and weddings are two very different things, and I think some of our characters would have done well to learn that sooner. Not naming any names. So I thought it would be an interesting thing to kind of look at how the show treats marriage, because a lot of the times it's really romanticized and we see the wedding, but maybe not so much of the aftermath. You know, even the series itself ends on Luke and Lorelai's marriage. So they've been together a long time already, but they finally get married. But we don't see them actually living that married life. We've seen them cohabiting, but not married. And so it made me think about all the weddings we see and the subsequent marriages, or the marriages that exist at the beginning of the show, and sort of how the writers portray them to us, because we have so many different versions of it, and some of them are not the healthiest. Some, most, maybe all. So I really wanted to sort of like dig into the social structures of coupling and marriage, and it made me think that we don't actually stop to think about them all that much. Like, what are their origins? Like, why are we still doing this? Does it still serve us? Do they work for us anymore? How are we updating our ideas about love and marriage and partnership in step with the progress that we're making in understanding psychology and sociology and all these things. Like, are we still living in the past, or are we actually updating our ideas about what a good marriage is? So I wanted to look at that through the lens of this show. So that's what we're going to do this week.
Indeed.
Yeah. So, you know, do you think that the show has a modern idea of marriage? Like, what even is modern marriage to you? And do you think the show depicts that?
It's an interesting question to answer, because I feel like even from a year to year basis, the concept of marriage is always just so fluid and changing, where even what we might think of it, I mean, you could say, like, in the 80s it was different from it than what it is now. I mean, the 90s it was, but I don't even think we need to go back that far. I mean, I think you could even just say within the past decade it changes. I just think it's something that's always evolving. um I don't think there's one set answer as to what a successful marriage is or what it looks like, because it's always going to break down to what is good and healthy and what is deemed right by the individuals that are within that marriage and within that union. Um, do I see it depicted well on the show? Yes, in the sense that I feel like it's portrayed accurately. They're not glossing over the hardships of marriage too much. I mean, sometimes I think they do sugarcoat it. I think, especially with Max, that man had no idea of what marriage entailed. I mean, we'll get to that. um, so it was kind of sugarcoating it in terms of two people potentially being together who shouldn't be together, not raising appropriate questions. But they did raise hardships and questions within the marriage. Some of the marriages that we see Suki and Jackson having their own problems from time to time, Emily and Richard, and we have like a whole plot point of them being separated. I mean, the fact that Lorelai goes through many boyfriends and some even unsuccessful marriages before she gets to one that works for her. um it's just, it tells me that, like, yes, I like what this show does with how they're approaching it, in terms of they're not, like, is not painting a picture of marriage being something that's just all rainbows and sunshine, because it is absolutely not. Marriage is something that takes consistent effort, consistent work, that you have to just put effort into every minute of every hour of every day. And even if we're not seeing that play out every single episode, it's there enough for us, where I think that Amy is illustrating those more difficult aspects of it well enough and communicating that enough to the viewer. So on the whole, yes, I like how it's portrayed.
That's fair. It's an interesting one because we have so many different iterations of it with different characters, different personalities, and different ideas and ideals about what a successful marriage looks like. You know, marriage is this like really interesting thing, both in our world and in the shows. Like, it is a huge part of like social validation. We want that kind of validation for our relationship. We want the ritual. We want the legal recognition for ourselves. Like, there's a legitimacy that comes with marriage that people who remain boyfriend and girlfriend or common law don't really seem to get from society. And so, like, we want these things, and we want that ideal of a long-term monogamous, lifelong loving partnership. But we also are mixing in ideas about, that person being our best friend, and, having good sex, having a blissful domestic life, all with the same person. without updating our ideas about how these things can realistically be accomplished. And so I think you're right in the sense that um, the show does show hardship in marriages. It doesn't gloss over it too much, but there are definitely some characters who have some of that like magical thinking, fairy
Mm-hmm.
tale ideal about
Mm-hmm.
marriage and having all of those things without having done the work beforehand to understand that that's part of marriage. And yeah, again, not naming any names. It's not our main character, and one of her main attributes in the first 7 seasons plus the revival. Yeah, so it's interesting, and that it's not even counting the economic impacts and the gendered expectations of marriage as well, in terms of you know what it means to be partnered and how that person takes care of you financially, and who plays what roles in the home. We really tend to see kind of a very heteronormative, male dominant relationship in most of our pairings on the show. Do you agree with that? Or, like, I guess Lorelai maybe is a little more dominant than Luke, and he's kind of submissive to her strong personality. But, like, what do you think about the other partnerings and how they sort of fall into their gender roles maybe a little too much? Am I reaching with that one or forgetting something?
I don't think you're wrong, and I wouldn't even say reaching, but I do think that there is good female representation in terms of assertiveness within marriages, more so than we may have expected to get. I'll think of the fact that first off, like Lorelai is the one who proposes. You know, it's not anything that you think like normally like, oh, the man proposes, but Lorelai is the one who takes that initiative. And Kirk even was just like, oh, I would never let a woman steal that thunder and that moment away from me. And it's just, well, I mean, if that's Kirk's prerogative to think that, and if you want to be the one to propose within your relationship, that's fine, work it out. But that's just an example of her being assertive in that. I don't think she's the only example, though, of someone who within a marriage is more dominant. I think of Paris and Doyle's marriage, and while we don't see how that plays out, we just know that they're married and they end up having kids in the revival. They end up going through this divorce, and it's not working out for them. But I could have seen that absolutely being a marriage where Paris was probably definitely, like, I would say she likely was wearing the pants in that, because that's just who she is and that's her personality. Um, I think I could see Lane and Zach's marriage being on equal ground in that sense, where Zach is not this masculine figure who's just, I will bring home the bacon, like, and that being more shared territory. Same thing with Suki and Jackson. So I'll say that I don't think you're wrong to say it's a reach that there's a lot of heteronormativity, but I think we get fairly decent illustrations of women taking more assertive roles within their relationships and marriage, and how they approach pursuing people that they want.
Yeah, I tend to agree. Yeah, I sort of thought or forgot about Suki and Jackson on that front. And even like Luke and Nicole. Nicole kind of is almost masculine coded in the fact that she's a lawyer and the primary breadwinner. And when their divorce happens, her lawyers are the ones who are like, trying to get what Luke wants out of it, which would usually be flipped historically in terms of women getting settlements from men. So that's an interesting one. But something you said triggered something from me in my memory. You said that Lorelai was the one who proposed. And that made me think of another time on major network television when we saw a woman propose to a man, which is Monica and Chandler and Friends.
Mm-hmm.
Originally, Chandler wanted to propose, and then Monica flipped it on him as a surprise, obviously. So a little bit different than the Luke and Lorelai impulsive decision. But it made me think of another scene with them where there's a whole episode devoted to this, actually, now that I think about it. So Monica finds out how much money Chandler has in savings and wants to spend all of it on the wedding. And Chandler's like, I'm putting my foot down and saying no to you. Like, you are not spending all of my money on a party. And she's like, the next time you call our wedding a party, there won't be one, you know? So it's this economic power struggle where Chandler has the money, but Monica wants, you know, an over the top, full blown 21st century wedding, which, you know, weddings becoming expensive luxury events is a whole other topic. And I really want to get to that when we talk about weddings specifically. But it plays in here where eventually Chandler relents and says, you know what? Fine, let's use all the money. I just want to make you happy. Like, whatever it takes, I want you to have what you want. And then he starts in on, you know, like talking about his vision for their future and saying, like, oh, it doesn't matter. Like, we can put this off or do it differently. And he ends up kind of telling Monica his fantasy life for them, which involves, you know, a house in the suburbs and kids and pets and an apartment above the garage where Joey can grow old. And it makes Monica realize, she's like, I don't want a big wedding. I want everything you just said. I want a marriage. And I think that's just such a perfect example of how we get so caught up in the idea of the wedding that we forget that, like, the wedding is not the marriage, and that once that big special day is over, you still have to live with that person every day, and you have to make damn sure that that's exactly what you want out of life. So I think maybe some of our characters don't consider that, or like we're not shown them considering it. And we'll talk about this more in a few minutes when we really start digging into Max, but especially Lorelai, you know, she clearly didn't put very much thought into what married life would look like with anyone, really. She just leapt. So
I'm like refraining, but like I'm wanting to like eye roll so hard.
Yeah. And that previous rant sort of leads me into my next point about how, like, sometimes weddings are displays of wealth, and how couples feel the need to spend all their money on a big party that's essentially like a one-day event, ostensibly under the guise of celebrating their love. And so they end up starting off their adult life, or even, you know, if you're getting married in your 30s, it's still a good chunk of change, you know, investing what could be a down payment on a home into a one-day event, because over the last 100 years or so, our idea of weddings has gotten so inflated that we think we need to have these big, you know, displays of wealth, and it becomes almost like a narcissistic look at me, look at my happy relationship kind of moment. And like, not everybody's like this, obviously, but I've seen enough like wedding dress shows set at Kleinfeld to know how brides and parents act when it comes to like spending money for weddings and trying to outdo everyone and trying to have a dress that no one's seen before and sparing no expense because the bride is your little princess kind of vibes. And what I love about this show is that most of the couples aren't like that. And in fact, that's a whole plot line with Suki. So that's nice. The only one who really kind of goes all out for their wedding is Emily and Richard at their vow renewal. And everything else is very like sweet and down to earth and whatnot. But I just thought it was interesting how weddings have sort of like ballooned in a couple decades, especially. And social media is a huge component of that now. As technology advances, what we think our weddings should be also makes a leap in assumptions about how much budget we have and what that budget should be spent on. So this show kind of predates a lot of that, and there wasn't that constant Instagram one-upping and trying to make everything look good for the gram. So I find that interesting about the show as well. But sorry, this is an extremely like long rant to get to the point. But
All
especially in the
good.
especially in the post World War II era, weddings were used as a way for a father to put on a big event for his daughter as she takes this next step into married life, and it was used as a demonstration of wealth. It was very like explicitly like we're doing a big thing to show off how well off we are. And that made me think of Emily and Richard and how they view Lorelai's marital status. Any hot takes on how they sort of project the type of marriage Lorelai should have onto her and like put these expectations on her that are based more on societal pressures than anything else, really?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think they're projecting it because I think that in the same way they're concerned about her career path and how much money she makes and what sort of job she has, I think the man that she ends up with, um, and I say man because I think that Emily and Richard are definitely of the mindset, that like they wouldn't even consider another option for Lorelai in terms of her dating, a man or a non-binary individual. Um, but I think again, just in the same way that they're concerned about her career path, they're so concerned and invested and worrisome about who she dates and her marital status because I think in their minds it's a direct reflection on them. And it's not even so much about my daughter finding somebody who makes her happy, who fulfills her, who is an equitable partner within a relationship, um, who can either be there for her from an emotional, physical, like financial mindset and or, she be there for them or they work on that together. It just boils down to how does this reflect upon me? And if she's dating somebody or God forbid, even getting married to somebody that we don't deem to be appropriate or of good breed or good status or not someone that we would choose or pick out for her or approve of, it makes it hard for them to get behind it just again because it makes them look bad. I feel like that's what we get from Emily and Richard early on. I don't think they don't stay that way, thankfully. I think they learn again to accept Lorelai's choices in terms of whom she dates, whom she marries. They start equating in her happiness in the way that they should and recognizing that that's more important than how society and other people are going to perceive them. And I even think of just Emily telling the DAR to basically go F off. And that wasn't a moment that relates directly to Lorelai, but it was just an example of her throwing those expectations and how people are going to view her out the window. And I think she and Richard over time do their best to learn that lesson with Lorelai and her partners and the expectations they have from her in that regard.
Yeah, I agree with all of that.
Yeah.
So that makes me think about the pressure to marry well in their minds also correlates with the pressure to marry Christopher, because not only is he of that correct stock, but he's also the father of the baby. And so they had this expectation that she would marry Chris and have a family with him. And that was acceptable in their eyes. Even though they were young, Chris could get a good job and Lorelai could raise the baby and they could live with them until they were old enough to be out on their own. But obviously, this isn't the way that Lorelai went. It's not what she wanted. She figured they were too young to get married. And, I have an aunt who got married at 17 and is still happily with my uncle. And I also know people who've gotten married in their 30s and divorced by 50. So I don't know that age is the only factor that would have led to the downfall of their marriage. So do you think that Lorelai just didn't want to marry Chris, or do you think it was because it was unromantic and that it was just a solution to a problem, as Lenny suggests to her at the end of season 6 when they're sort of thinking about this? Or do you think that she just didn't want to be married to Christopher?
Both.
All of the above.
All of the above. I think that especially at the age of 16, when we have that flashback scene with her and Chris just sitting on the staircase landing while their parents are just, going at it below, and they're hearing that debate, Christopher is kind of resigning himself to the fact that, like, okay, like, I'll get a good job, we'll get married, we'll do it for the child. And I'll say, like, I don't fault him for that at all. I admire that courage and that sacrifice that he's willing to make for Lorelai and for the sake of his unborn child. I don't think that's to be bypassed or dismissed. I like, and I appreciate what he's trying to do there, even if it's even a bit naive and too sacrificial, because he doesn't know what he's giving up. I like that Lorelai is having a bit more self-reflection at that moment to realize that this is not something that should or need to define my career and or my marital status. So I don't need to marry Christopher right now just because I got pregnant with his kid. It can take away my autonomy within relationships going forward if I end up being married to this person for the rest of my life. It could do the same for Christopher. And maybe we're just, at the end of the day, not the right people for one another. I think that even at the age of 16, maybe that's not exactly everything that she was, equating or figuring out. But I think she was putting some of those puzzle pieces together where she was able to at least realize it doesn't have to be that way, nor should it. Maybe down the line we do end up getting married and we do work out, but it's just too soon and we're too young to put ourselves into that right now. And on top of that, that's not what Lorelai wanted. She wasn't ready to saddle herself to Christopher despite what was going on. So, and that's, one of the reasons why she ends up running away, because, her parents were continuing to put these expectations on her. But I'm glad that she was able to have that introspection to realize I need to do what's best for me here and not sacrifice, finding a partner down the line that could be right for me. If it is Chris, if it's not Chris in this moment, just because of this situation, which is weighty, but shouldn't be defining for the rest of my life.
Yeah, and spoiler alert, they do get married in season 7, and a lot of people hate that plot line. I'm not one of them. I actually think, it kind of made sense to put a final cap on that relationship, because it was always something that hung in Lorelai's orbit, right? And it was something she always sort of had in the back of her mind for so many years, even with the Luke. Like, she was really happy with Luke, but once their relationship started to degrade a little bit, she found herself kind of returning to that comfort of her youth and running to Christopher when things got tough. So I think they needed to have that answered for themselves. And so I'm not surprised that they got married. And I'm also not surprised that it didn't last. But it was one of those things that, like, it kind of felt right that it had to happen at some point.
Mm-hmm.
And I think even if Amy and Dan had kept on the show, they probably would have had something similar happen. I don't know if they would have had them get married or whether they would have just had them try out a relationship as finally two free adults. But, I think it made sense the way that it happened. And it made sense that Christopher was impulsive about it and that he pushed it on Lorelai because he was always the one who clearly wanted it more. And yeah, it's something that Lorelai says, it didn't end badly. It just ended because it shouldn't have happened.
Mm-hmm.
So she does eventually come to that realization that they were never quite right for each other, and that she says to Christopher, you're the one I want to want. But it's clear that she doesn't actually want him, and that they don't make a good pair. So, that's jumping ahead a little, but I think it kind of makes sense to round out like the Christopher storyline that way.
Yeah.
But I guess that kind of leads to a more general question. Clearly, Lorelai and Chris did not have a good marriage. But so, what is a good marriage? Like, what do you think are the main components to a successful marriage?
That's a loaded question. There are so many, I think there are so many facets to it. There's not one answer where you can't just, say like, oh, it's love. I think these are all components, but I can't just say, oh, it's just all about love, or it's just all about trust, or it's all about good compatibility. Like, there are so many things that are going to factor into what makes a marriage good. And there's not even a one size fits all glove, nor should there be. But some of the things that, and again, this is such an opinionated question for anyone to answer. But some of the things that I think lead to a good and successful marriage is, again, love for the sake of loving the person. I feel like sometimes marriage can be too idealized as a goal and a point, like where it's just like, I'm successful because I'm married. And I can even see Emily and Richard falling into that mindset where they didn't see Lorelai as successful because she was in her 30s and still single. And she was never going to be a success or a successful person until she got married and found a life partner. So I think there needs to be that like idealization of marriage as a goal and as just something where people look at it and say like, oh, you're doing well in life because you are married. I think that needs to get thrown out the window. And I think that it starts with not doing that and loving the idea, loving marriage for knowing that you're going to be with a person that you genuinely love for them and for their personality, and not for what that union represents to society. Other words and things like just that I think are important. Trust, compassion. I think communication is at the forefront so much within relationships and marriage. There always needs to be good communication, compatibility, physical and emotional, a good listener, a good support system, and someone at the end of the day who is not going to care about, and again, I say not going to care about these things, but not necessarily going to put too much stock into having exorbitant wealth or how their marriage and their household and everything that people, like two people put together, looks to the outside world, but just being happy and content within your own union and having that happiness be at the forefront of how you're making decisions with one another.
Yeah, those are definitely all good things. And I will add to the list, like, love is an interesting one because I think some people misunderstand what love is sometimes. I tend to think of it as sort of an amalgamation of a few different feelings for someone, like admiration and respect for someone, in terms of, you appreciate their intellect or their kindness, their compassion, their sense of humor, and you respect their choices and their values, and you share those values. Communication's another important one. Like, I think that's like foundational to basically every relationship, not just a marriage, but and being able to communicate your values and your needs and your desires within the relationship, because if you can't do that, then you can't have a relationship, at least not a good one. So those are very key. And compatibility, obviously, is another one. But just sort of breaking that down, I thought about this quite extensively a few years ago before I was ever in a relationship. And I realized that there are like 3 or 4 different kinds of compatibility, and you need them all for a marriage. You need that sort of like physical compatibility, the attraction, the chemistry, the uh, like being drawn to someone and comfortable with them in that kind of capacity. And you need the emotional compatibility where, you know, I've suffered from depression and anxiety in my life. And there was a guy that I was like sort of semi dating many years ago who's British, and he had like a very stiff upper lip mentality. And he totally dismissed depression being a thing, you know? So when someone sort of doesn't understand your emotions or belittles them or believes that your struggles aren't even real. Hold on. I got.
Oh, I don't have my flag with me. Oh my gosh.
Okay. Yeah. Red flag.
I don't have mine with me, but yeah, I would just say, like, if that's going on and they're dismissive of those sorts of things and they're not recognizing that mental health is a real issue and they're just saying, no, it's false, it's made up, it's all in your head, all of those horrible cliches that the world can throw out. Thank you. Next.
Yeah. Girl, run. So there's that. And then there's lifestyle compatibility. So, you know, if you don't like doing the same things, or you have very opposite schedules and it makes it difficult to even see each other, you know, those are big roadblocks for a successful relationship, because a relationship requires time put into it. You know, love is an action, it's a choice. You know, it's not just a feeling. You have to choose to love this person every day, no matter what. You know, if they're pissing you off, you still have to love them, and you still have to choose to maintain that relationship. And that requires maintenance and work and maturity to overcome those challenges, and to come out even stronger and more committed at the end of the day. So, yeah, I think those are all. There might even be some that we've missed, but I think those are like definitely. I think we've collectively hit on a lot of the pillars of a good marriage. So, I guess why don't we move on to Max and Lorelai, and how Lorelai thought.
I'm trying so hard not to just like laugh.
I know it's so bad. We have a whole episode on Max, so like go check that out for like more background context on exactly how we feel about the rest of their relationship. I think we touched on the idea of them being married as well, because it just kind of fits into the whole thing. And we obviously talked about their proposal a few weeks ago. But what do you think about their compatibility and sort of how things go for them between the proposal and Lorelai essentially leaving him at the altar? Any particular thoughts about that period that stand out to you?
What compatibility?
Fair enough.
I mean, need I say? Yes, I will say more. Need I say more? Probably, but like I could even leave it there, and I would just be like, "Have a good night, you guys." I think that they thought they were compatible, and I'm sure there are arguments to be made for ways minutely in which they may have been. However, I don't think anything that they even thought that they had was ever genuine. I think they were both coming into the relationship with one another. And again, this is a point that I made already in the Max episode, but I'll bring it back up because it's worth repeating here. I think especially for Max, but also potentially for Lorelai, but more so for Max, it was a lack of option. I think, again, I said, he was in a school system where most of these Chilton parents are probably already married, in relationships, going through a divorce, or already divorced and just not wanting back into a relationship or another marriage. And he's surrounded by adolescents all day and perhaps does not have enough time, even on the weekends, to date or meet people within his age bracket that he would be interested in. So here comes an attractive 30-something woman into his classroom for parent-teacher night, and it's an option that he hasn't had. And I think he gloms onto it because it's all he's got in that moment and all he's had. And Max, like, and that's scary too, because Max is smart. He's attractive. He has a lot going for him. So I'm sure if he put in the effort and the time, he could find a partner that is more compatible and suited to him than Lorelai ever was. But I think that their compatibility that they thought that they had with one another just stemmed from a lack of options, loneliness, desperation, all things which never equate to success and are all horrible reasons why you should be getting into a relationship with somebody, but let alone considering marrying them and tying them to yourselves in that way.
Yeah, I agree. I think a lot of it was actually based on lust as well. Like
Yeah, that's true.
they were clearly very attracted to each other and probably hadn't really like felt like that in a long time, if ever. So I think that was a big thing. And again, that's why I say that love's not a feeling, you know? You can feel extremely like drawn to someone and like super connected to them. But the maintenance of that feeling and that connection
Mm-hmm.
requires work. And so that feeling will eventually fade over time. And if it does and there's nothing left, then that's not going to work out. So you
Yeah.
really have to make sure that your relationship isn't reliant on that, you know, initial love at first sight attraction. So they never really surmounted that hurdle.
They did not, amongst many other things that they never addressed or tackled, but we've talked about that before.
Yeah.
Again, go back and watch that if you want more context. But the fact that they never took their relationship or marriage or anything that comes with it seriously was just solely, and at the end of the day, why it failed and it never worked.
Yeah. And we've had conversations about that in the past as well. It's, you know, you shouldn't wait until after the proposal to consider what married life is going to be like. You know, you really have to spend time with that person in your space and understand their domestic habits and their rhythms. And we don't get that until at least Hammers and Bales and Red Light on the Wedding Night, where Max is finally there in Stars Hollow and contemplating staying the night for like the first time or something. And I'm like, how have you guys not done a trial run of this before? Like, excuse me?
Yeah.
Why would you ever say yes to a marriage proposal, you know, outside of some sort of religious cult where they don't let you hold hands before you're engaged? Like, don't you think maybe it's important to know how
Yeah.
someone conducts their lives in their own home? Because usually it's those little mundane domestic things that people fight about the most. And if you have no idea what you're dealing with, you are in for a world of pain. Like, it's going to be difficult if you can't be on the same page about that. Like I said, with the lifestyle compatibility, if you're, you know, very different levels of clean or very different levels of
Mm-hmm.
organized or, you know, have very different sleeping schedules. And, you know, it's clear that Lorelai is not comfortable having someone else in her domestic space yet. You see this when she sneaks down to Rory's room and has this whole conversation with her about how it's weird that he's there and how their lives as they know them are now over, and you know, you're not going to be able to walk around in the buff anymore. And she's like, I don't think I've done that since I was 3, so I don't see why you're freaking out about this. Like,
Yeah.
you're going to adapt, but you should figure out that you can adapt before you legally tie yourself to someone purportedly forever. Kind of an important factor of compatibility that you might want to make sure you have in place before you spend forever with someone.
Yeah. And it's hilarious to me that Luke is the one making her question all of that, because Luke has his own work to do within relationships and being ready for a marriage too. But it's not like he's the last person that I would say I would expect that from, but he's not the first person that I would say I would see or expect to be giving like Lorelai that much insight in terms of like, have you done your homework here? But if he's even recognizing that she has not, that's very telling.
Yeah, and Luke has some amazing rants about like weddings and marriage at the beginning of season 2, and I just want to highlight a few of them. Like there's the one where he talks about how weddings are usually a disaster and like it just always causes more trouble than it's worth. And then there's the one, I think it's in Red Light on the Wedding Night, where he's like, "You should just elope and get it over with." And Lorelai says, "Believe me, it wasn't out of the question." And he says, or Suki says, "You don't get a wedding over with." And he says, "Why not? It's a bureaucratic civil ceremony, a pretty pointless one." And then he goes on to say, "It's not biologically natural for people to mate for life. Animals don't mate for life. Well, ducks do, but who the hell cares what ducks do? I mean, people grow and evolve their whole lives. The chances that you're going to grow and evolve at the same rate as someone else, too slim to take. The minute you say I do, you're sticking yourself in a tiny little box for the rest of your life. But hey, at least you had a party first, right?"
Ever the cynic.
Ever the cynic. And then he has that nice conversation with Lorelai on her steps after he delivers the chuppah and says, "I guess if you can find that one person, one who's willing to put up with all your crap and doesn't want to change you or dress you or, make you eat French food, then marriage can be all right, but only if you find that person." Yeah. And then they stand up together under the chuppah. And, just
it's not symbolic at all.
Just, yeah, the extreme symbolism of that, because, for anyone who's not versed in Judaism, the chuppah represents like the home. It symbolizes the groom's home specifically, and how it becomes the bride's new domain, and more specifically, even than that, the bridal chamber where the marriage is consummated. So, yeah, very significant moment to have them stand under the chuppah together. Amy and Dan are Jewish, so I love how they just sort of like slide that in there. Mm-hmm. I think it's perfect.
Agreed.
Yeah, and going back to Suki's comment about like how a wedding's not something you get over with, she romanticizes Max and Lorelai's relationship as well. At their wedding shower, she says, they're in love and everything's perfect. It's like, how is Luke the one telling her to maybe like ask a few questions before deciding to marry this guy, and you're just over here like, "Yay, this is great, I'm so happy for you." Like, yeah, as the best friend, you should maybe step in and be like, "Are you sure you're ready for this? Have you done your homework?"
Yeah, Suki is, I mean, I get it, but I don't, because like she's a total sweetheart, and she is like the epitome of what I think you just hope and want for in a best friend. And Lorelai got so lucky with her, even though I think that she never really understands or recognizes or appreciates what she has in Suki as a friend. So I think it just stems from a little bit of just Suki being naive because she's so excited that her friend is finally going to be with the guy that she's sensed chemistry from with the two of them for so long. But again, it doesn't always equate. So I think she should have been a little more counseled and reserved in what she was telling Lorelai and the advice that she was giving her. But I understand, like, like it's Luke, I've sensed this for years because the whole town has noticed it for years and it's finally happening. So I'm just happy. I think she let that get away from her a little bit. But I think on the whole, Suki was always just a good enough and a wise enough person to let Lorelai know that, hey, you're dating somebody and you're with somebody right now that is not good for you, and here's why I think that's truthful. And Lorelai didn't always listen, but Suki was at least, I think, willing to have that conversation with her friend when she recognized that something wasn't on the up and up.
Yeah. I want to put the cap on the Max and Lorelai stuff. I think, we've kind of talked Max to death at this point, but I ain't mad. I think they both just wanted the milestone for the sake of it. And they wanted the validation and the ritual and the, like, I put a ring on it without really considering what marriage would mean for them until everyone else around them kind of pointed out to them, hey, maybe take a step back and think about this for a second.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really apparent in Red Light on the Wedding Night that Lorelai really just wants the wedding because, Emily brings up all these sweet stories about her wedding to Richard, and Lorelai's reaction is sort of like, I figured once I found the shoes and the veil or whatever, the rest would be gravy. And that shows that she's planning for a wedding and not a marriage. And she just has some messed up and incomplete ideas about what married life is supposed to be. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Glad she didn't marry Max and that we didn't have to sit through that disaster.
Yeah.
But let's move on to Lorelai and Luke. We don't actually see them being married so much. We do see them in a domestic partnership. But, we do have them engaged for the better part of season 6.
Mm-hmm.
And so, we're kind of getting a window into their living situation when they're kind of living together and renovating her house, and also seeing the injection of April into the equation. So is there anything about Lorelai and Luke that stands out to you?
As good or bad?
Either. Just maybe think about season 6 and think about how that colors your idea about their readiness for marriage or their commitment to the idea of marriage.
I don't have my flag with me, but I would flag him. I would flag him for not being more upfront about April and April's presence in his life once he knows about her himself. I understand that children are a very important, especially when you're becoming a step parent to somebody, a child's well-being is going to factor in even more so because you want to be sure that you can trust your partner with that child. But Luke has known Lorelai for so long, and that trust is established in there, that's not something that I think would have been an issue for them. And I never have loved the fact that he kept that from her, because I think she would never have judged him for it. She would have understood, especially when you know that it was totally sprung on Luke when April's already a preteen. It's not like he knew from the time of her birth and never said anything. He hasn't known for very long, but I don't love the fact that he wasn't truthful and upfront with Lorelai about it. You've got to trust your partner in that way. And I really hated that. Everything else about their relationship was generally okay. I mean, it took them long enough to get to where they had to be, and they definitely had, periods of separation. As Lorelai cheating, no bueno with how that wrecked Luke, and the emotional devastation that did. But on the whole, I think their relationship was not perfect and not completely healthy, but one of the healthier ones that we get in the show. However, again, I will flag him for that moment. I don't love Lorelai cheating and how, just knowing what that would do to Luke. So they worked through it, and good for them that they did. If that's what they decided they want, but it wasn't perfect for them either.
I don't even know if it's cheating. Maybe we'll dig into this a little more when we talk about cheating on the whole, because she did offer him an ultimatum and say, either we go get married right now and we just get this over with, or I'm out because I can't keep waiting around. And when he said he wouldn't jump with her, she's like, I have to go. And so technically, they were on a break. they were no longer, like, at least according to Lorelai's dictate at that moment, their relationship was over. It was still a betrayal and a devastating one. Still not something she should have done, but I don't know that it can technically be classified as cheating. But we'll fight that out some other time. But yeah, I like that we get to see them sort of living together before marriage in terms of how Luke decides to move into her house. He wanted the Twickham house for them originally, but it was like, okay, if you want to keep living here, we'll expand the bedroom and the bathroom and the closet, and I'll live here with you. And he works his butt off and spends lots of money to help her upgrade the house so that they can peacefully cohabit there for as long as they so determine. And, they seem to work pretty well together. And Luke has his job and his own kind of little man cave still above the diner if he needs a bit of an escape or something. So they seem to have a decent dynamic that works for them. Emily sort of points out at some point, like, actually it's in the revival where she says, you're roommates, you're not really partners. She calls out their lack of marriage, as if that's somehow bad. And, I don't necessarily know that it is. You could go either way. There are some people who never get married and live together for a long, long time very happily, and that's fine. Legal marriage is not, the end all be all for happy committed relationships. It's not the only determining factor, obviously. So it was nice watching Luke and Lorelai get married, but it took them some time to get there and to work through their emotional roadblocks to get there. But yeah, I just tend to agree with you that their relationship is one of the healthiest. But it has its moments where I'm like, oh, Luke really just kind of does whatever Lorelai says and bends to her will all the time, which is not the healthiest.
Mm-hmm.
But they seem happy together, and they seem to find a dynamic that works for them. And they make it last for 9 years post series until the revival, and then they tie the knot. So something must be working for them. And that's, I think, maybe an important point to touch on is everyone gets to determine the boundaries and the terms of their own relationships. And I think Lorelai and Luke are one of the best examples of that, because they may not do things the way that everybody else expects them to, but that doesn't mean it doesn't work.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of doing things the way you're expected to, let's talk about Emily and Richard's marriage. We did a whole character breakdown on them last week, so we're probably not going to spend too much time here, but like, what about their marriage works for you and doesn't work for you? Or like, is there anything about it that stands out as salient?
Even though I think we have opinions on whether or not the roles and the responsibilities in terms of what they were tasked with and expected within the marriage was good, was bad. I think we said, already that some of Emily, like the societal expectations were put on Emily, were not necessarily the best ones. I think they were good at just always complimenting and supporting one another with what needed to happen within their marriage for it to be successful. They weren't necessarily overly gooey or sappy or emotional with one another, but that doesn't mean that the love wasn't there. I just think that perhaps like their love language was just shown in other ways, with, Emily being willing to plan his social events and his engagements and organize, his business meetings and meetings with clientele. And then, Richard you know, just in his own way, I think just always acknowledging that and being thankful of it, and or just giving out checks to people. It can seem very blasé, but I feel like even that's his love language too, where he might not be able to formulate words to communicate how proud he is of somebody, how much he cares about them, how much he loves them. And so he'll just say, like, here's a check for X amount. But that's how he says it. So to answer your question, I will say I just think they complemented each other well in terms of how they supported one another, even if it's not what you would expect to see within a marriage. And their verbal communication was not always prevalent or at the forefront, but it doesn't mean that they weren't a good match for one another.
Yeah. They're one of the couples that goes into the series married and comes out still married. And, they're married for 50 years. So they had to be doing something, right? But they had one of those more conservative, almost antiquated kinds of marriages we maybe don't see that much anymore. And yet they're one of the most successful couples on the show, at least in terms of like what we would traditionally consider to be a quote unquote successful marriage. So, again, not a perfect marriage. There was the separation and the ultimate reconciliation, the renewal of the vows. But somehow they made it work for a long time. And it was a till death do us part kind of marriage. And so, you have to celebrate that at some level, even if there are some more toxic elements to them as people and the type of relationship and patriarchal power differential they upheld and tried to enforce on other people as well. So,
yep.
Yeah, I guess good job, Emily and Richard. You made it work. Okay, so we've been going for like an hour already, so I feel like we need to do a bit of a speed round.
Speed round.
Other marriages on the show. All right. Suki and Jackson, go.
Thumbs up. Good communication, genuine love for one another. The hysterectomy thing was the hysterectomy thing, but we're great parents. We're in line with that too, in terms of how they wanted to raise their children. We're supportive of each other's careers. So thumbs up for them.
Yeah, they're one of the couples that starts early on in the show and also goes the distance. And we see in the revival that they're still together. So again, a couple who seems to have found a way to keep the love alive. And yeah, the vasectomy thing was super messed up. We will talk about that again in detail at some point.
Vasectomy.
Yeah, I have thoughts. Hysterectomy would definitely be a very extreme procedure. Vasectomy at least is technically reversible. But yeah, I think they could have gone another way with that.
Yeah,
they could have gone another way with that storyline, and they didn't. We will talk about that. But for the most part, yeah, they're a very cute couple, and they have, I'm assuming, 3 beautiful children. We don't actually see the birth of the third one because Suki is still pregnant at the end, but assuming that they're all sort of living their life out on a farmhouse and just enjoying that domestic bliss, somehow finding a way to make it work. So again, yeah, thumbs up. We love their proposal. Their marriage seems pretty solid. Liz and TJ.
Not thumbs up, not thumbs down.
Fair enough.
Not the best communicators. I don't think we see enough of how they parent Dula. And Liz, even, it's not wrong of her to ask Luke for help because that's what family is there for, but I think she relies on Luke to parent Jess and then just, help out with Jewel a little bit too much when she maybe just doesn't want to, not that she can't. I think TJ is a good guy. He tries to do right by Liz. I don't think they have the most, I don't know. It's hard because we don't really see a lot of it. I wouldn't say that they have a marriage that we get enough of where we can pinpoint it and say, like, I love what I see from them. Um, I think they both have their flaws, and I think they have flaws within their marriage, which kind of makes me more middle ground. So I would say it worked for them, and sometimes it's not all that matters, but it's important.
Yeah. They're another interesting one because you're right. We don't see a ton of them. But Liz is clearly someone who has a troubled past and has had a parade of men before, and most of them were just complete losers who left her or died or, were clearly not good to her and or Jess. And so, it really puts Jess in perspective when we meet Liz and at the wedding when she's telling Lorelai like how many husbands she's had and how many boyfriends she had. She's clearly not the most emotionally stable or mature person or parent or partner. So seeing her end up with someone like TJ, who's clearly a good match and someone who actually stabilizes her and keeps her sober and supports her and sticks it out with her despite their big blowout fights and Liz's self-doubts when it comes to having another child, given how things went with Jess. Having TJ support her through that and still want to be with her and believe in her, that's pretty sweet. And we know that they stay together too, because they talk about them in the revival. I really wish we had seen them in the revival. Unfortunately, they did not appear. But
as always, we throw it out there often enough, but here comes another opportunity to do so. Amy, just give us another one.
Pretty please.
One, just one more.
Pretty please with a cherry on top.
Just one more.
Yeah.
You can do it.
You can do it, please.
You got time, so get it done, because I know you're listening to this.
Please, Amy, may I have another season?
Yes.
Yeah. All right. I think that covers Liz and TJ. Luke and Nicole.
No.
2 big thumbs down on Luke and Nicole. I like
How
Nicole.
About no?
How about no? I like Nicole. And the actress who plays her seems totally lovely. She seems like a great person. But again, with the compatibility, 0. And they just completely impulsively got married, broke up, and got back together, and moved in together, but didn't move in together, and got divorced, and didn't get divorced.
Yeah, there's nothing that I can even... I can't rationalize that marriage. I don't know why they leapt into it in the way that they did. And it ended so fast that, they just knew right away, like, we messed up here. And this is not something that is good for either one of us. And they got out of it quickly. But just a huge no. There was nothing about that was good or healthy or right.
Yeah. I like Nicole. She seems like a cool person. Like, if she's a real person and I met her in real life, I'd probably like her because, she's a lawyer and very intelligent and you can have really cool conversations with her. But I didn't see any, the compatibility or chemistry with Luke. So, nope. Ooh, Dean and Lindsay.
Also, no. And we've talked about this, and I've said it before. I do feel bad for Lindsay because she was young enough when she entered into this marriage that I think she had some rose-colored glasses on with what she thought marriage was going to be like. It wasn't like that. And for Dean, also just going into it thinking it was going to not require the work and the effort that marriages do. They were both largely unprepared for not even being with one another, but for marriage on the whole, let alone the fact that they still probably were not right for each other at the end of the day. But there was just so much against them that I think it was just going to be almost impossible for them to make it work once all of these really significant issues started to arise. So, yeah, that's also something that should have never happened, but did. But it's a learning step for the viewer in terms of what not to do.
Yeah, I think they call this a starter marriage, which, again, not something that you want. Lindsay was clearly a band-aid from his breakup with Rory, and he hadn't fully processed his feelings for her and let them pass by the time he decided to marry Lindsay, and that was just not the right way to go. Marriage is not something that you should just be like, "Oh yeah, let's just do this because we can and we like each other." Like, you need a little something else beyond that. You need more maturity, you need more life experience, and they had none of that. And so, they had very naive and shallow ideas about what marriage should be without getting out into the world and dating more and trying things out. And it just crashed and burned for them because, like you said, their expectations were out of line with reality, basically. So, yeah, 2 big thumbs down on Dean and Lindsay. I mean, justice for Lindsay. I hope she's found her peace and her happiness with someone who treats her better, because she's a perfectly nice girl who, got dragged through it, unfortunately. All right. Chris and Sherry.
How many no's do we have to drop?
How many languages can we say no in? Or like,
it's pretty similar in most of them, but yeah, again,
not.
No, 9.
99.
Again, there's always, it's the fault of both parties. There's never one person who it's just like one person was wrong and the other person didn't do anything wrong. There's always blame to be shared. But Sherry was just, again, too self-centered for her own good. She was definitely someone who wanted to make the marriage all about her and her desires and her wants, not factoring in Chris's career, his passions, anything that he might want to do in life. She was just way too self-centered. Also not ready to be a parent or a mother. And I don't even know if she wanted to. I think it was, again, maybe something where she thought, like, this is what's expected of me and it will just look good on paper. But should have never happened. And then you abandon your kid. So you're a scumbag.
Yeah, they were on the verge of falling apart and breaking up and parting ways, obviously, because Christopher comes to Lorelai and wants to start something up with her when they find out that Sherry is pregnant, and they get back together thinking that a baby will magically fix this relationship and that they should just give it the old college try because of the baby. And yeah, we all saw how that turned out.
Pretty great.
Nicked. Bad. No. Nothing.
No, just poor Gigi.
Yeah. Although she's living in Paris now, so life sounds okay.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah. All right. Lane and Zach.
We've talked about this. I don't know if they were ever the right people for one another. I think this was just written in for whatever misguided reason. Lane and Zach are not bad people at all. They're both solid human beings. I just don't think they were right for one another. But that's how the show went. So for what we saw within the marriage, I think, the love is there, the care is there. Zach might be a little too immature at times for his own good. But Lane is patient enough to get him up to speed on what he needs to know and what he needs to do to be a supportive husband within the marriage when he's faltering short. Again, just I think stemming from not knowing what he should be doing. I love how, Mrs. Kim always steps in to help with that and even counsels Zach on how to be a better husband and what he should be doing. So again, I don't think they were ever the right people for one another, but they had a successful marriage. They made it work. They have 2 kids that they're seemingly raising to be normal human beings. Middle ground, again, just one thumbs up. Not two thumbs up, like just one thumbs up. Again, because I don't think they were the right people for one another, but it wasn't a bad marriage.
Yeah, I feel like the way you just described their marriage just sets a really low bar for what a good marriage is supposed to be. But yeah, they got married pretty young, kind of, again, impulsively, very fast. They had split up, and Zach used a proposal as a way to fix things. They were married within a couple of weeks after that, pregnant within a couple weeks after that. And again, a couple that found a way to make it work, and they look like they're sort of working their way up through the world. They bought a house, and you're right, they've got 2 kids that seem all right. So,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah, no, I agree. I probably set the bar low in my description, and in life, that's definitely not how I personally see things. Just within the context of the show, the bar was made low for them by the writers.
yeah, I agree. We'll talk more about it when we get to Lane's storyline, but Zach ain't it.
No.
Paris and Doyle.
Nope.
I know that you say you never really saw them. I kind of did. I'm sad that theirs doesn't last because I thought they were a pretty good match. Like, Doyle did a good job of putting up with Paris. She can be a bit of a ball buster, and he really took it in stride and was able to like match her.
Yeah, perhaps. I don't know. Again, my mindset might be different if we had seen more of it. Doyle just definitely seemed exhausted within the marriage by the end of it. And perhaps it was because Paris was just too much of a ball buster and too strong for him. And he just wasn't equipped to be with someone with that personality. And that is that strong-willed and strong-minded. I don't know. There's a lot that can be said there too, in terms of like, should you have tried harder to make it work, or, you know, is it right for you guys to go your separate ways based on what's happening within your marriage? If we knew more, I probably could formulate a better conclusion, but just based on the limited information that we have and what we're given, it doesn't seem like their marriage was serving either of them anymore in the way that it needed to.
Yeah, you're right. We do have limited information. It's hard to tell. But a lot of what I got out of the revival in terms of why it happened was sort of superficial reasons on Paris's part, in terms of like, he's a screenwriter now, Rory. Like, and she seems very condescending toward his career shift. And, that's not a nice thing to do when, he's seemingly pretty successful at it. He had dinner at Michael Bay's house. That's got to be something, right? They seem to be making good money, and they've got the kids to think about as well. And so, I mean, it seems stupid for that to be the reason that they broke up. And I wonder if it's just the writers making a joke out of it, which, again, isn't fair to their marriage, and it makes a mockery of the institution a little bit, and paints them both as very shallow characters that we know that they're not. So, a little disappointed with the fact that they're divorced in the revival, because you know what, divorce doesn't necessarily mean that a marriage has failed or that people have failed. It usually just means that something has happened that necessitates a break, right? Like there's been a breach in trust, or a relationship is for some reason no longer tenable. And it doesn't mean that the people within it didn't try or didn't do their best to make it work. And so to give 2 characters who were like such a force in the last couple seasons to make them divorced in the revival, again, just feels like well, we just wanted to throw a wrench into things and be like, you split up because he's a screenwriter. And it just doesn't give it the respect it deserves. I might have been okay with it if they had given us better reasons, or if they had sort of like shown us a breakdown and why it's like really truly not possible for these two people to cohabit and co-parent in the same house anymore and stay married to each other. But once again, they made a joke out of something they shouldn't have made a joke out of.
Mm-hmm. That's fair.
Yeah, divorce is not necessarily something we should be ashamed of, but it's also something that we should still take seriously.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's not an easy thing for anyone to go through. It's, one of the two most difficult things, most stressful things you can go through in life, because it's the loss of something significant to you, much like a death, and it should be treated with more gravitas.
I agree.
All right, I have one last wild card.
Okay.
They're not married yet. Logan and Odette.
No. It makes me think of like, what's the word? Not an arranged marriage, but oh gosh, I'm blanking on the word. But when you enter into a relationship with somebody with that, like essentially saying like, yes, that's our goal, and I don't know why I'm blanking on the word.
I feel like arranged marriage is kind of a good term for them, because Logan refers to it as a dynastic plan, which leads me to believe that they were either set up or at least ordained by their parents for strategic, economic, political, social reasons. And that is not a reason to marry someone, at least not in this day and age in general, unless maybe you're a monarch. Like, I just don't think that we should be allowing parents to make that decision for us anymore. And it seems like Logan somehow in the last 10 years lost his backbone against his parents. And it's just not fair for him to deny his own desires and needs to marry someone just because his parents think it's a good idea. So if these were real people and they could hear me screaming through the void, they would hear, don't get married. This is a bad idea. And Logan should be with Rory, because that's clearly where his heart lies. Odette, we don't even meet her. We see her as a sleeping figure in the bed behind him, and she's sort of this like looming specter at times. But she's not a character. She's a plot device. And so we don't know enough to even empathize with her enough, or to understand anything about their relationship outside of the fact that Logan is cheating on her with someone he's loved very deeply for a long time. And so, again, it's another one that's hard to say in terms of their compatibility and their care for each other. But just the fact that Logan needs to go outside of their relationships to get his emotional needs met by Rory is a bad sign. And like I said, do not let your parents make this decision for you.
Yeah, even though I'm still racking my brain trying to find the word and it's not coming to me, I will just echo everything that you said. It seems like a decision that was just not even of their own making, and that they just kind of went along with it to please their parents, to avoid confrontation. And that's so wrong. And again, just what you said is true too. Like, Logan was definitely very clearly not having a lot of his needs met by Odette, and he was willing to just enter into this marriage with her anyway. And he probably still would have, if Odette was expecting monogamy, which maybe she was, it seems like Logan was not going to give her that. And that's also problematic, where if one person is expecting that and the other person is not on the same page, just another reason why, like, you've got to either compromise or that can't work.
Yeah. 2 thumbs down for Logan and Odette. # Team Logan forever. Battle of the Boyfriends.
Oh, it's
Coming your way.
coming. We're getting every week that goes by, we get closer to it.
Yeah. Beginning of April. Tune in for the Battle of the Boyfriends because it's going to be an epic two-parter. And
Yep.
it's
I mean,
going to
we'll
be
be fighting for, who we support, but you can fight with us in the comments and, defend the guys that you think were best fit for the women in this show. So come join us for that. That's going to be a really good one. But that's not for a few weeks. In the meantime, what's next week?
Well, a few weeks ago, we did an entire episode on the Gilmore Girls and Stars Hollow. This time, we're going to be talking about all the times that we leave Stars Hollow and Connecticut in general. And we're going to talk about like travel on the show. So we're going to talk about their road trip to Harvard and their European backpacking trip and Rory's spring break. Well, we'll just be touching on all the times that characters like went on vacation and probably focusing especially heavily on the ones that we actually see. But, there are a lot of times when characters leave Connecticut and it makes for some interesting storylines. Like, hey, remember that time that Michelle went to California and was on The Price is Right?
Yeah. Remember that time when Mrs. Kim ships off her daughter to South Korea for the entire summer because she needs to just like get some Bible camp in her?
Yeah, I forgot about that one. Remind me to add that to the list after this.
I will.
And also another one that I forgot that I also need to add to the list is when they go on tour. Hep Alien goes on the Seventh-day Adventist Church tour of America.
Good times, good times.
Exactly.
Yeah, that'll be next week. We'll be talking about all of that. But in the meantime, go back and watch some of our old videos while you wait for that. Just do all the YouTube-y things. Subscribe to our channel. Like this video. It's one click. It really helps us out. We're always so grateful for that. And just thank you for all the support and for everyone who continues to be here with us week after week.
We love you guys.
We do. We love you and we appreciate the support. And we'll see you next Friday night for dinner. Ciao.
Ciao. We now pronounce this episode over.
Over.
Bye.
Bye.